Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we are concluding our introduction of the Gospel of Mark this morning by talking about some characteristics of the Gospel itself. We've mentioned several already. One is that it is a gospel of action. It moves quite quickly. We have also mentioned that it is a gospel of detail, and you only have to read a few verses into the text to see little details that you don't get anywhere else in any of the other gospels that make it vivid, that engage our senses, that allow us to picture it. We mentioned that it was clearly written for a Gentile audience because he has to explain Jewish rituals. He has to define Jewish terms. And we also mentioned that this is probably a script or a transcript. It really is something that is to be delivered verbally. It's very honest about the disciples themselves. It is in no way idealizing everything that happened. It presents Jesus as God's perfect son. But everyone else in orbit around Jesus are the human beings that they are. And it's honest about that. A great deal of candor about the disciples and their failings and their foibles and their obtuseness around Jesus. This gospel begins by saying that it is a gospel. Verse 1, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. It calls itself a gospel. The word gospel means good news. We've talked about the fact that it really is the delivering of the story, of the good news. If I were to rush in and say, hey, something great has just happened, and then I would tell you a story about what has just happened, that's exactly the way this gospel reads. And one wonders whether or not Mark himself, writing earlier than any of the other gospel writers, which I believe that he is, may have coined that phrase or used it, not necessarily coined the word, but was the first to use it in this particular Christian way. It's not used in John's gospel, and it's not used in Luke's gospel either. It's used in the book of Acts, but only twice. This is a word gospel that is Mark's word and that Matthew also uses, but not as frequently as Mark does. It also begins by telling us up front, I'm telling you about the Son of God, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus, the Son of God. Jesus continually refers to himself as the Son of Man in this gospel. So immediately we have communicated Jesus' simultaneous existence as fully human and fully divine. That's there from the very earliest sharing of the gospel. If this is a transcript of Peter getting up to preach and telling people about Jesus, if it's largely that, then from the very beginning, that's the message. Jesus is fully human, fully divine. We talked about the language of the book being not polished in any way, and that being evidence of it probably being a script or a transcript. And I said earlier that doesn't mean that it is not a finely crafted work, because it is a finely crafted work. And we're going to see stylistically so many things that just make this book a masterful piece of storytelling. We've already mentioned how Mark so many times delays a key element of the story to the end that is a surprise at the end, and it just reinterprets everything that we've thought about. And the prime example of that is the raising of Jairus' daughter. She's called a baby girl throughout the whole narrative, and then at the end we find out she's 12 years old. But that's the way her father saw her, and that's the way Jesus saw her as well. And it just embeds the story more deeply into your heart. And it's an element of an exercise of his skill as a storyteller, Peter's skill as a storyteller. We've talked about already the vivid detail. That's his skill as a storyteller. There are the grouping of events thematically that would help someone remember the stories together, but would also give us, a three-dimensional picture of something happening. Like early on in chapters 2 and 3, we have the devolution of Jesus's relationship with the Pharisees. We'll notice that when we get to the text. And it's almost like that scene in Citizen Kane, you know, that long scene where Cain and his wife are sitting around the breakfast table. And it really shows the dissolution of their marriage, one breakfast after another. And Peter's doing that. Mark is doing that as a storyteller when he talks about Jesus and his relationship with the Pharisees. After that, we have a series of stories, miracle stories, in which the key word is the word fear. And the fear is always the fear of the calm. We have frightening things that happen, but the word fear is only used. People are afraid whenever they see the power of Jesus and the calm that he produces. We talked about the unusual way it begins and ends. We'll talk more about the ending when we get there. It is a puzzlement, a problem, and we'll talk more about that later. But the beginning, people just they appear. We're not given any origin for John the Baptist or of Jesus. They just come onto the stage, and the action begins in that way, and it's fast paced. Everything happens immediately, and by the end, you know, we are breathless, really, at the telling of this story and wanting to know more. Okay, well, we're going to start in the text tomorrow. We're going to look at verses 1 through 8. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.